I'm Peggy Grant. I'm going to be the MC for tonight's webinar. And I want to welcome everyone to our fourth webinar in the South Bay Cares Sustainability Series. So as some of you may be aware, the focus of this series is to share practical ways that we can be an everyday environmentalist. Simple actions that each of us can do to show our love and appreciation for people and our planet. The steps may seem small, but when multiplied by many people, they make a true difference. So our hope with this series is to educate and inspire action and to make it easy to put those actions into daily practice to help us all live a more sustainable life and help create a better world for today, our children, and future generations. In the webinars to date, we have talked about finding a silver lining in the pandemic by focusing on how it has changed our daily lives in a positive way in terms of our relationship with the earth. But this week, we don't just have to look for silver linings because we can celebrate that we have a new president who is a committed environmentalist and who has already taken two significant actions to help our planet by putting the United States back into the Paris Climate Accord and putting a halt to the Keystone Pipeline. But if you listened to Joseph Biden's inaugural address, you heard him say that we can't just leave it up to the folks in Washington to solve our problems. It takes each of us being committed to take action, individual action, to move the ball forward. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. And in the rest of our series is how each of us can be a part of this movement to really affect positive change. So in previous seminars, we talked about practical ways that we could take environmental action by making purpose-driven food choices. We gained insights into transformative agriculture, and we learned how to grow food from scraps and how easy it is to compost from our own homes and in our own gardens. In sum, basically, no matter how small the steps are that we take, they all add together to make substantial change for our environment. The one thing we have not yet done as part of this series is to hear from the youth in our community. And we are so excited tonight that we have two teen speakers who will be sharing their experience with us. So Sam Torres and Rylee Goldfarb are passionate environmental activists. These young women have been honored by businesses and nonprofits and more for their award-winning actions in support of our environment. You may have even seen them in a recent Beach Reporter article that highlighted them as eco-leaders from Grades of Green. Now, Grades of Green is a local nonprofit that empowers youth to take action to care for the environment. Our two speakers have been very involved with Grades of Green, and they will share a little bit about that. But also, you should be aware that Grades of Green has over 600,000 students involved in their programs. We are so grateful for that because it takes our collective action to win the battle against climate change. And before I forget, it would not be a South Bay Cares Sustainability webinar without our environmental giveaways. So we have some fabulous giveaways tonight that we will have periodically through the course of the webinar. And as always, you have to be present to win. So please stick with us. So now I would like to introduce you to our first speaker, Samantha Torres, who will inspire us to say no to fast fashion and yes to making sustainable choices in what we eat by reducing meat consumption, among other things. Sam is a junior at Miracosta High School, where she is the founder and president of the Grades of Green Club. She's also a member of the Manhattan Beach Sustainability Youth Council and has been a member of Grades of Green for 8 years, leading beach cleanup teams and other activities, taking environmental action in our community. She actively advocates for environmental change at city council and school board meetings. She has a voice and she uses it for the environment. So Sam, before you get started with your formal presentation, would you just tell us a little bit about how and when you got started as an environmentalist and what it was that inspired you?
Yeah, of course. So, like you mentioned, I've been involved with Grades of Green for 8 years now. So, since I was a little third grader, and I can remember going to the Grades of Green meetings in the back of Grandview Elementary and eating pizza at the meetings at the El Segundo location. So, Grades of Green has definitely just been a big part of like my childhood for as long as I can remember. I'm currently still in Grades of Green with my club at school that you mentioned, and we have our just awesome mentor Robin Murphy, who's just been helping us guide us through this past 3 campaigns. We're on our third campaign with our team at the school, and she's just been so awesome helping us. In the past, we did a beach cleanup campaign, and right now we're focusing on a virtual Meatless Monday campaign that's gonna kind of come out in the next couple of months, and it's going to hopefully be super awesome. I'm also a part of the Manhattan Beach Sustainability Youth Council, which just has been just such a great opportunity to help me like widen my environmental reach and just get like more involved with the civic engagement. I've just been super duper duper blessed my whole environmental journey with just like awesome mentors. So like Robin from Grades of Green, James, Kim, just all the Grades of Green people are just so awesome. And then not to mention the great people from the Sustainability Youth Council. So you have Ali Voosjager, who's just been with me since day one with Grades of Green and now at the Sustainability Youth Council, and Dana Murray, and just I've just met countless just awesome people throughout my environmental journey. And I'm definitely super grateful for all the like the awesome people and the great resources that I have available to me. It just definitely just made my environmental journey so much better.
Thank you for sharing that. I know that many young people will be inspired by you and by Riley. And I think it's important for us to realize that environmentalists can be the youngest among us, and oftentimes they are natural environmentalists. So it's fantastic that you started at such a young age and that you've stuck with it.
Thank you.
So why don't you go ahead and share with us your presentation on fast fashion and healthy, sustainable food choices.
Yeah, thank you so much. Before I start this presentation, just big shout out to everyone from South Bay Cares, just for making this event happen, and just super grateful for me and Riley just being able to come and talk about the stuff that we're passionate about. Today, I'm super excited to talk with everyone about being an everyday environmentalist and the two endeavors that have really helped me in this journey in the past couple of months. So, starting with the presentation. So first, I'm just going to give like you guys a general definition of what fast fashion is. So Merriam-Webster defines it as an approach to the design, creation, and marketing of clothing fashions that emphasize making fashion trends quickly and an emphasis on cheaply available to consumers. So now that I've given you guys kind of an idea of what fast fashion is, in the next slide, I'll kind of talk about why it's bad. So I just have a few statistics here that kind of talk about the different aspects of fast fashion on the environment. So I'll start off with the stat of how the average American throws away 81 pounds of clothing every year. And we see that less than 1% of used clothing is recycled into new garments. And I just see that as such an alarming statistic as we see this stat from the UNEP of how it takes 3,781 liters of water to make a single pair of jeans. And it kind of makes you think of how many pairs of jeans we throw away in this average of 81 pounds a year that we could just like upcycle into new clothing or buy a secondhand clothing. Another stat that I thought was really interesting was how the fashion industry is responsible for 10% of our annual global carbon emissions. And this ends up being more than all international flights and maritime shipping combined. I just think that that statistic is just so interesting because as a student, just in general school and as an environmental student, I feel like we're always taught like how fossil fuels are leading to our carbon emissions and driving and flights and all of that. And while obviously those are still very important aspects of our carbon emissions, it kind of makes you think of like how everything that we do can have an impact and how everything down to the clothes that we wear can affect our carbon emissions. And I just think that's really something cool to be mindful of. And then, so all these statistics that I've mentioned so far are obviously the environmental ones. And I think as environmentalists, when we think about issues, we kind of always tend to just focus on, the environmental aspects of it. But, a lot of issues are multifaceted. So when we look at the ethical aspects of the fashion industry and see how only 2% of fashion workers around the world are paid a livable salary, I just think that's such an important statistic to look at when we think about us as consumers. So on this next slide, here's just another infographic, like how I showed you guys the one about the jeans, just how it takes 2,700 gallons of water for more or less for a single cotton t-shirt. And I just think that's another thing that we can just be so mindful of, we get rid of shirts every year and just how much we can just reuse these or wear them secondhand. So on this next slide, I'll kind of talk about, what we can do. So I obviously talked about the effects of fast fashion on the environment. So the main thing would be, us saying no to that. So I have two main points, and I'll kind of get into these in my own personal experience with them. So first is obviously, buying secondhand. So that could be thrifting or these like platforms such as Depop, Mercari, and Poshmark. So with thrifting, now I've gone thrifting a few times. It definitely takes a lot of patience because you really have to go in there and, find the gems. And that patience wasn't necessarily something that I was too awesome at, because you have to be super patient to thrift. So props to all the thrifters out there, because you really gotta find patience to find the good stuff. So for me, using these platforms that I mentioned has just been so nice for shopping secondhand. And for me, I started off on Depop, which is just such an awesome platform. And I've been on these platforms for a few years now, but since quarantine started, I was just, spring cleaning, everyone's doing stuff around their house just at the beginning of quarantine, finding new hobbies. So for me, that was Depop. And it started off with me just like listing all my clothes there, just trying to get rid of stuff, make some money. And then I kind of learned about the effects of the fast fashion industry, and it became like, oh my gosh, I should also be buying all my clothing secondhand too. And then these platforms are just super, super duper awesome. I think there's a few misconceptions with buying secondhand, I think, but one big one that I think is like this negative connotation that, buying secondhand is like the clothing is cheaper or dirty, or, like some type of negative connotation with that. And that's just not the case at all, especially on these apps. There's tons of people like listing their clothing that's new with tags, like it's in great conditions. These apps have just such great buyer protection. So if what you get doesn't come as promised, you get your money back. It's this just great. These platforms are just so awesome. And I think a second misconception is that if you buy secondhand, you can't find the brands that you like. You can't get the items that you like. It's just kind of going to be a type of compromise that maybe you don't want to compromise for your clothes. It's your comfort, it's your style. Why should you have to like compromise for less? But that's just so not the case at all with these apps. I mean, they're search engines, like how Google or anything is. You search up a brand that you want, and I almost 100% guarantee that these apps will have it, especially with all these different platforms. If you're on all of them, you're almost guaranteed to find the exact item that you want. And it's just super duper awesome to utilize such great resources like this. And I know that as a teenager, I definitely have the upper hand with like knowing how to use these apps and technology like that. But it's parent proof from my own experience. Like for Christmas, I asked for clothes and I only asked for them secondhand. So my parents on their own found out how to use like Depop. And it's just like if you're buying like online shopping in general on any other platform. I'm sure that a lot of people kind of got into that more since COVID, and we're not going out to malls and stuff like that. And just these platforms are just so easy. They're so accessible. They're just so awesome. And what I go by is, why would I buy something that has to be manufactured again if it already exists? If someone already like doesn't have a use for it, they're selling it, then just, why not? And for me personally, I know that I don't necessarily mind if something's been worn a few times. If I know it's in good quality, I can just put it in the wash and it's perfectly fine to me. And I just think that's also such an awesome way to, save a few bucks. Like, I'm buying my own clothes. I don't necessarily need something that's like very brand new. So if I have something that, I want, and if I can save a few bucks, that's just super awesome for me. So I just would totally recommend these platforms for anyone. They have mobile apps, but they also have like Safari platforms if that's something that you're better with the computer than on the phone. But the next part of saying no to fast fashion could be splurging on sustainable or ethical brands. So for me, since I buy my own clothes, spending money on these sustainable and ethical brands isn't necessarily something that's feasible for me, just because obviously fast fashion is made cheaply, but when you make it sustainable and ethical, that price obviously goes up just because of the quality and the ethics behind your clothing. But if I, in my personal opinion, if you if this is something that you would like to spend your money on, I think that is just such a great purchase and just such a great option to have. Obviously, it's not going to be something for everyone, which is why I think that also buying secondhand is just such a great option too. But as we continue to kind of spend our money on these sustainable and ethical brands, like just obviously supply and demand, so they'll just become more readily available to us. And I know that these brands are already growing, and I just think that keeping an eye out for this growth in the next couple of years, I think will just be super interesting, because secondhand shopping and like a switch to sustainable is definitely something that a trend that we're continually seeing. I just think that's super duper awesome, to kind of be mindful of these choices and change them as consumers. So that's what I have to say on fast fashion. And on these next slides, I'll kind of get into a plant-based diet. So just like I did for the last one, I'm kind of going to give a basic definition. This is the Safari's definition of a plant-based diet. So that'd be one consisting mostly or entirely of foods derived from plants with few or no animal source foods. So I'm going to backtrack a little bit on this next slide. Not to overwhelm everyone's statistics again like the last one, but I just think that these are super important to look at when we look at this statistic from the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization. They said that our total emissions from global livestock is 7.1 gigatons of carbon dioxide per year, which represents 14.5% of all of our anthropogenic greenhouse gas emissions. And like I said, for the fast fashion one, I just think that's such an interesting statistic to see, because again, when we're taught about like carbon and like stuff like that in school and our emissions, we're not really taught about our personal choices. So I think that this obviously our food seems to have a bigger carbon dioxide impact than does our clothing choices, and I just think that that's such an interesting statistic to be mindful of. And then this next one is, if everyone were to adopt the average diet of the United States, we would need to still convert all of our habitable land to agriculture, and we'd still be 38% short of the land that we need to be able to feed everyone on this diet that we have. So I think that's just so interesting when we see like how unsustainable the average American diet is. And I just think that's such an interesting thing to kind of look at our own personal choices and just the culture that we have with food and stuff like that. I just think is super cool to kind of be mindful of. So on this next slide, this is the graphic from that last stat that I showed you from Our World in Data. And it kind of just shows how ineffectively and how unsustainably our current system is with food. Like we're obviously still not feeding the whole world, and our population is exponentially growing. So I think that when we kind of look at food that way, I think that it's such an interesting thing to like look at us as our food consumption, because obviously we're always eating multiple times a day, and I just think that looking at those choices is so cool. So on this next slide, obviously with those stats that I just gave you, those are really big global numbers. And I feel like I'm guilty of this. I know everyone's guilty of this, is we see those big global numbers and it's easy to put it off. Like, oh, that's not my problem. That's my community's problem. That's my country's problem. That's the world's problem. Like either that's not my fault or I'm powerless. It's like it's normally one of those two. And we tend to like put off those type of big global statistics. So then I think when we kind of look at that on these statistics on a personal scale and see how much impact our own personal choices make, I just think that's such powerful information to have. So I'm sure that you guys have already kind of started looking at these statistics that I've put on the screen, but some ones that I'll highlight is how a burger requires 660 gallons of water for one single burger, or how a single egg requires 53 gallons of water, or a pound of beef requires 1,799 gallons of water. I think that it's really interesting when we look at this in in terms of water, because I know for me, like when I look at these statistics of greenhouse gases, that's not really something that I can like visualize in my head. But when I see it in water, like that's something that is more like tangible to me. And I'm sure that's something that's more familiar with everyone. Um, but something that's like especially interesting to me is that throughout, especially in elementary school, they drill it in our heads really young, take shorter showers, turn the faucet off when you're brushing your teeth, like all this stuff to like save water. And of course, those are things that are definitely super duper important. And I feel like we've all really gotten this down by now. Like it's in the curriculum. It's like, it's something that just we're all so used to saying. It's almost like cliche at this point. But then I just think it's so interesting how we're not taught how much resources we can save by like the personal choices that we make. Like how many showers and how many teeth brushing sessions we can save by just not eating a burger one night is just so huge compared to those little habits that we've already adopted, and just incorporating all of that in, I just think is such a good thing to be mindful of. Um, and I think that it's also really important to look at the next slide that I'm going to show you guys is the water effects of a plant-based diet, because obviously everything has an environmental impact that we do. Nothing comes without an impact. So I think it's super cool that we also acknowledge that while the meat and dairy that we have also has an impact, the plant-based foods that we eat aren't without an impact. And that's something that I've definitely become more mindful of thanks to my AP environmental science teacher at Costa, Mr. Kurtz. He definitely really drills into us looking at both sides of the story. And I think that's super important for us to acknowledge that everything that we do will have a impact, and we have to really compare the two sides. And I think even when we do this comparison, kind of putting this into perspective, like the amount of water that it takes for a burger, the amount of water that it takes for a pound of rice, in my opinion, it's just a clear choice of what decision we should be making if that decision is available to us. Because obviously it takes less water for us to have a pound of rice. As we see, it takes 449 gallons of water than it does for a single burger, or how a pound of tofu requires 302 gallons of water. And obviously these are still high numbers when we think about it of the daily like water that we consume. But I think when we compare it to the meat and dairy, it's just like, to me, it's just a clear like indicator of what decisions we should or can be making that are better for the environment. Um, so on the next slide, I've obviously kind of already talked about the decisions that we can be making. So that would obviously be like opting out meat and dairy products for plant-based ones. So if you're a coffee drinker and maybe you get milk in your coffee, maybe, you go to the coffee shop the next day, and instead of getting cow's milk in your coffee, you get oat milk or almond milk. Or maybe one day you go meatless on Mondays, or just here and there you make the conscious decision to you recognize the impact that your food has, and instead you opt out for a more environmentally friendly one. But eating plant-based, something that is just should always be emphasized, is it's not about being perfect. I mean, that definitely goes for being an environmentalist in general. Like it's being perfect just isn't something feasible. Like we talk about waste free, like all this stuff. Like obviously it's doing what we can to our best ability. Maybe you really, really love your meat and you just can't give it up. It's too big of a sacrifice. Or maybe you have personal health concerns and you just can't go fully plant-based, or a million other reasons, which all of these reasons are perfectly justifiable reasons. But we all definitely have the option to here and there substitute out for plant-based options. And I think that just being conscious of our choices and knowing the effects that they have it makes it so much easier to be able to make these decisions and make these choices, which I think is just really cool to know how much power our choices hold. I know that that's definitely something that motivates me. I'm sure that it motivates a lot of us environmentalists out here. So then on this next slide, I'll just kind of talk a little about my own personal plant-based journey and kind of reference these resources here. So I've been fully plant-based since March of last year. So like at the beginning of quarantine, I just came across this Earthlings documentary, and it just had such a strong effect on me that I just immediately went plant-based. This documentary was fully just based off of like the moral part of our decisions and like eating meat and dairy products. So for me, that first choice was I don't I don't want to eat like animal products or meat and dairy and all that stuff. But that also has like kind of evolved into the environmental aspect too. I'd say both evenly. And there's so many different great reasons to go plant based, but those are definitely my two like main drivers. And I think that also a big question that you get when you tell someone that you're like fully plant based is, oh, is that like a hard sacrifice? Is that like, oh, I could never do that? Like you always get like comments like that. And I'm not sure if that's because I've been pescatarian and vegetarian in the past, but going plant based is actually a fairly easy transition for me. And I think that that's almost entirely attributed to just the great amount of resources that are out there. I'm just definitely so grateful to grow up in this age of technology where I just have so much information just readily available to me and like the click of a button. Like it's just all there. And there's just so many great resources out there. So for me, that was like mainly like YouTube and Instagram just for like recipes, and just there's so many great content creators out there sharing not only their recipes but also their own personal stories. So that kind of serves as like inspiration or motivation and just something to kind of like relate to, which I think is just so awesome. um and yeah, and also like Safari, if maybe YouTube and Instagram social media isn't really your thing, there's still so much great many blogs and just regular recipe posts just out there on Safari that are just so awesome. um and I think another thing is like, how can you eat plant-based in a family that has no diet restrictions like that? And I think I definitely got pretty lucky. Every Sunday, my family has kind of started incorporating, like, we eat fully plant-based on Sundays. Even my dad, who will never go plant-based in his life, you see him eating tofu every Sunday. So that's just definitely something that I definitely got really lucky with, and I definitely rubbed off on my mom and sister. They eat very plant-based now, even though they don't technically have any restrictions. But if you look in our freezer, I don't even think there's any meat in there anymore. I just kind of slowly rubbed off on them. And yeah, it's just been super awesome just kind of seeing like, now that you make the conscious decision because you know the environmental effects of your choices, and then seeing that rub off on your family and rub off on your friends is just your choices and your inspiration to other people just have so much power, which I think is just something that I've learned in the past couple months, whether that's with fast fashion or with food, which is just so awesome. And just the rest of these documentaries that I listed here are just some super great ones that I watched at the beginning of my plant-based journey that not only talk about like the moral part about going plant-based, but also the environmental effects. And this godairyfree.org was something that I found like a few months into being plant-based. And it's just such an awesome resource for anyone who's kind of maybe like starting to go plant-based or is just like interested in it. They basically, essentially what they do is like rank the different type of plant-based things. So they'll have like best plant-based pizza, best plant-based ice cream. And from my personal experience, their ratings are definitely pretty accurate. So if that's something that you're looking for a substitute, it's definitely super great. And this foodprint.org is something that James from Grades of Green showed me. And basically you can calculate the environmental impact that your like diet has, which I think is just another great eye opener. Like I showed you those other statistics, but I feel like when it's your own personal impact, I think is just so much stronger. And I could definitely ramble on about plant-based or fast fashion just for hours and hours, but that's where I'll cut it off there. On this last slide, I just have some of like my sources from the stats that I showed. And again, I'd just like to thank everyone from South Bay Cares, Laura, Dolly, Peggy, just for letting this happen, and everyone from Grades of Green, just for helping this event tonight. It's just super awesome, and thank you.
Wow, Sam, thank you so much. That was awesome. It's clear how committed and passionate you are about the environment and about these aspects of it that you've incorporated into your own life. And I was thinking as you were speaking that you should definitely become an internet influencer and show all of the cute fashions that you've gotten from your thrift stores, and also post some of your favorite recipes. And I'm sure you will get a bazillion followers because your enthusiasm is absolutely contagious. So thank you.
Thank you.
That. Fantastic presentation.
Thank you.
Okay, so it's time for our first giveaway. And now that Sam has inspired us to make some positive, sustainable food choices, this is a way to make it easy. Fruition Organic Market has a $25 gift card that we are giving away to our first lucky winner tonight. Laura is spinning the wheel behind the scenes, and Dolly will put in the chat who our lucky winner is. So Fruition Organic Market is a vegan cafe and market that recently opened in Manhattan Beach. The menu features fresh and flavorful meals. You can pick up grab and go sandwiches, salads, soups, chili, sauces, and the market section has amazing stuff, healthy snacks and pantry staples. And bonus, it's all the to-go items feature sustainable packaging. Congratulations, Rachel. Our next speaker is Rylee Goldfarb, who is a student at Redondo Union High School. Rylee has been actively involved with Grades of Green, like Sam, for 9 years. She is a leader at her school who has organized green teams. She's implemented lunch and waste sorting systems, has hosted environmental festivals. She actively helped with the passage of Manhattan Beach City Council's ban on plastic straws by canvassing local restaurants to get their support. And Rylee hopes to translate her passion for environmental preservation into a career and a lifelong mission. So Rylee, I will ask you also to start by telling us what it was that inspired you to get started with the environmental movement and how it was that you came to be a young environmentalist.
First off, I want to say thank you for having me. When I was in first grade, Grades of Green came to my school to do a presentation to help us with trash sorting. And I was already very interested in helping with our planet, and I was involved already in trash sorting. One of the leaders, Allie, noticed how passionate I was and gave me her business card to give to my mom. Now, of course, being a 6-year-old, giving a business card to your mom, she was pretty shocked. But we both followed up, and I became part of the Grades of Green Youth Corps, and I've been there for 9+ years. And all of the youth corps advisors like Robin, Allie, Kathy, James, and so many more inspired me and taught me so much about environmental activism and leadership. I love participating in these outreach events, as you see in the pictures, and educating others about simple actions to be green. I'm very excited to spend my time tonight talking about a cause I'm very passionate about. The 6-year-old me wanted to get rid of the Great Pacific Trash Patch, but I've learned a lot more about plastic and plastic pollution since then, and I want to share the information to hopefully inspire you guys to make a change. Sam and I have both encountered firsthand how plastic affects the environment just by living near the ocean. We see it on the sand, in our water, but plastic pollution is more than just litter. We need to change this narrative. Plastic pollution is not just trash ending up in our oceans. Plastic pollution impacts everyone. It is a human health issue that pollutes our air, water, and leaches into our land. It's a social justice issue. It disproportionately impacts poor and minority communities, and it's a global issue endangering all species and our planet. 99% of what goes into plastic is fossil fuels, and that is the same as coal plants, car emissions, and greenhouse gases. The toxic plastic cycle, which is the process of how plastic is made, pollutes at every step. First, starting off with extraction, where natural gas and oil are extracted to make plastic. Some ways of extraction are fracking for natural gas, drilling with oil rigs in the ocean and protected areas, or drilling in oil sands. The negative effects of these are explosions, air and water pollution, and loss of habitat. Then there's transportation of natural materials, which are transported by pipelines, tankers, or trucks to refineries. And these cause pipeline explosions, oil spills, they lead to contamination and pollution and emissions from vehicles. Refining, which is natural materials being refined to create chemicals to make plastic, creates toxic runoff and toxic chemical emissions. It impacts the air of neighboring communities, and it impacts local water and sea life. With the production of plastic products, there is more toxic emissions and greenhouse gases released. And worst of all, it contains up to 80% of toxic chemicals by mass. Distribution of newly created plastic products are transported to consumers and additionally release greenhouse gas and emissions. Disposal, which is used plastics being disposed of in landfills, incinerators, or they're being recycled. With the landfills, it causes loss of habitat. Litter, like in the Great Pacific Trash Patch, interferes in the ocean's ability to absorb carbon, and chemicals from trash leach into the soil. With incinerators, air pollution, toxic chemicals, greenhouse gas emissions, all are created from burning these plastics. And with recycling, toxic chemicals are released and leach into the environment through the process of breaking down plastics to create pellets. Now we are going to the single-use plastics, which are the worst of all. These plastics are only used once, but they never decompose. Plastics are inexpensive to make, and they're seen as convenient since they're just like a grab-and-go item. And they were marketed as an advancement. But as we know now, about 300 million tons of new plastic is created each year, and 40% of that is single-use. Fun fact, 8 million metric tons of plastic enters the ocean each year, which is equal to about one trash truck dumping its load of plastic into the ocean every minute of each day. COVID-19 has had a large negative impact on our environment. There's been an increase in single-use plastic items during COVID-19, including greater demand for packaging food, disposable shopping bags, online ordering, the installation of plexiglass dividers in shops and offices, and the widespread use of gloves and protective masks. During quarantine, people were unsure about virus transmission on items, which led to a demand for additional packaging. Restaurant closures required takeout containers, and disposable masks and gloves are seen more often in trash inventories. There's also an explosion of online ordering, and people who used to care about the issue of packaging are less concerned now during the pandemic. And the plastic industry also lobbied to lift the plastic bag bans during the crisis, which is really a problem. We can't recycle out of the problem. 91% of plastic is never recycled. When plastic is disposed of, 32% becomes litter, 40% ends up in landfills, 14% is incinerated, and 14% is recycled. But of that 14%, only 2% of the recycled packaging is effectively recycled or turned into something useful like shoes, yoga mats, even clothing. The US recycling has been decreasing each year. Before China's ban in 2018, 50% of low-value plastic was exported to China. Now there is no foreign market for the US plastic trash. We can't ship our waste away. We really can't. There are an increased cost of recycling in the US. There's a need for more trucks and to collect the plastic, and there's no infrastructure to process these plastics here in the US. Plastics can only be recycled once since they degrade, and it is not a clean process. Recycling releases toxic emissions, greenhouse gases, and pollute water and soil with these chemicals. It's cheaper to make new plastic than to recycle it, which is really upsetting. The 3R solution, reduce, reuse, recycle, is a big problem. Most consumers focus on recycle, out of sight, out of mind, but it isn't going away. We must reduce our use. Corporations are not held accountable. The plastic and petrochemical industries are set to quadruple plastic production by 2050. $5.2 trillion in fossil fuel subsidies a year help keep costs of plastic production low for corporations. This discourages them from finding solutions and keeps new plastic cheaper to make. The plastic industry is taking advantage of the COVID crisis and they're promoting their products and demonizing reusables. And research actually shows that the virus can remain 3 times longer on plastic than other tested surfaces. Can you believe that? And the 4 worst polluters, plastic polluters, are Coca-Cola, Nestle, PepsiCo, and Unilever. We need to hold corporations responsible. One way by doing this is creating extended producer responsibility, which is where the plastic producers have to put their money into solutions to help reduce the issue. The onus should not be put on the consumer or local areas. Around the 1970s, there was a big marketing push for the plastic corporations to create the narrative that litter was a consumer problem so that they wouldn't be held responsible. And as a result of that, consumers had to pay CRV taxes on cans and bottles, and communities had to pay for the infrastructure to support recycling efforts, including getting trucks and recycling processing centers, which is not fair. Another solution is the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act. This was introduced on February 11, 2020, and puts responsibility onto the producers of plastic products and bans non-recyclable single-use plastics and pushes for the US investment in recycling and composting infrastructure. Currently this year, I'm participating in the Grades of Green Climate Solutions campaign. My project is to educate and motivate people to reduce their use of single-use plastics and to switch the responsibility from plastic waste and pollution to the producers of plastic. I'm planning to host a virtual screening of the documentary, The Story of Plastic, for my school and the community. I also want to create a social media campaign around the slogan, "We can't recycle out of the problem, reduce your use." Within this campaign, I want to encourage people to sign petitions to support the state and federal bills, pledge to reduce their use, commit to send letters to manufacturers of these single-use plastics, write to their representatives to support these bills, and tag their support on social media. We need you. I want everyone to know my motto. No matter what size or age you are, you can change the world. Please follow your passions. Look for things you deeply care about or injustices that really motivate you to see a change in the world. It doesn't have to just be an environmental cause. Look at the students who started the March for Our Lives campaign to combat the gun violence, or the young people who helped to get out the vote and register voters even though they cannot vote yet. And one of my really close friends of mine, who was inspired by the Black Lives Matter movement this past summer, had started a social justice advocacy group. You guys can do this. Don't wait. The time is now. Please get involved and make a difference. Thank you so much, South Bay Cares.
Rylee, thank you so much. Oh my gosh, we have our own Greta Thunberg right here in the South Bay. I really, really am so impressed by you and Sam and your commitment and passion. The information that you have shared and the research that you have done to back the campaigns that you're involved in with hard science and with facts to support why everyone needs to do something. And I'm confident a lot of young people are going to be motivated by the talk that you just gave. So let's go ahead and motivate some. Reduce your consumption with our second giveaway. Rylee has graciously donated some merchandise, some sustainable merchandise from her Grades of Green campaign. She has a reusable water bottle, straw, and gift bag. So Laura is going to spin the wheel behind the scenes again and tell us who our winner is of this fabulous giveaway.
Our winner is Christopher Lopez.
All right, great. Congratulations, Christopher. And we will make sure that we get this fantastic merchandise to you. So at this point, we can open our conversation up to questions and answers. So
there's one question that I think that it would be great to hear. We have a lot of students joining us tonight, and you guys have mentioned a lot about Grades of Green, and I believe that there are some campaigns going on. So I think Robin Murphy from Grades of Green, if you're with us tonight, if you can just talk a little bit about the campaigns, and if it's not too late for students to join, tell them how.
Great, thanks so much, Laura. Yes, the Grades of Green Climate Solutions campaign. It's a school year-long program that guides students to learn about the climate crisis, develop a solution for an issue that they're passionate about, and then lead a project to take action in their community. So we're currently mentoring over 90 student teams throughout the world that are working on projects focused on different topics like energy, transportation, waste, food, and trees. Each student team that joins up is paired with a Grades of Green advisor that will help them with resources and guidance every step of the way. The program runs from September to May, but we are still accepting new teams and there's still plenty of time to get involved. So for anyone who's interested and wants to find out some more information or register, please go to our website, gradesofgreen.org. Click on the Climate Solutions Campaign under the Programs tab, and you'll have all the information you need there to find out more information and register for the program.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Robin. I'm sure that there are a lot of young people who will be interested in hopping on board that campaign. So I had a question for Sam, and it goes back to the fast fashion. Are there influencers that have kind of taken up this mantle of fast fashion? I know that, having two teenage daughters myself, that a lot of what they see on the internet, on YouTube, on Snapchat, on TikTok especially, right, is, you know, that they kind of all want to jump on the bandwagon. And are there some influencers who have really taken to heart this issue of attacking fast fashion and promoting you know, secondhand and thrifting and reusable clothing products?
Yeah, there are definitely a lot of good ones out there. I can't name any specific ones off the top of my head, but there are just so many great ones. If you even just like search up like secondhand shopping or anything like that, you'll just come up with like so many great influencers and just content creators out there that are just so for the secondhand shopping or even the like upcycling of clothing like that, and just maybe like tutorials and stuff like that of how to like really like upcycle your clothing or how to shop secondhand, how to like really all the information on that is there's definitely just so many great great influencers out there.
Yeah, awesome. One of my daughters is definitely into the thrifting scene, and she does a lot of her sourcing online. So hopefully she will rub off on her other sister in that respect. And then also, Rylee, I, you know, was thinking about as you were speaking that just in the last week or so, Mexico City announced a single-use plastic ban, which is really phenomenal to have that kind of an example from a city the size of Mexico City to say, that's it, even in the time of COVID, no single-use plastics. I know there's some sort of an initiative in the South Bay right now to promote having customers need to request the plastic utensils when they have a takeout order. I know one of the things that drives me crazy is that you always find those utensils in there, even when you say at CPK, no, I don't need them. And then you look in the bag and there they are. So do you know anything about that initiative, or are you involved in supporting that in any way?
I definitely support that. I just recently heard about that. I'm so happy that they're finally doing this. I know that the LA City Council members took a step in the right direction, and they're proposing that food accessories, you know, like plastic utensils, napkins, condiment packets, that those should only be provided on request. And I think that's a great start in getting this whole platform or this whole idea that we do not need to rely on plastics. And I'm very happy that this is what we're doing now.
I did want to ask Sam, as you're talking about plant-based diet, and as you switched from, you know, pescatore and into that, did you have any observations health-wise or energy-wise, or, you know, did it impact you in a way that you could observe?
Yeah, I think that's definitely a big concern for a lot of people when they switch to a plant-based diet, because I'm a runner, so just we always have to make sure that we have all of our supplements and everything, especially like iron is just such a big thing, especially with female runners. Just it seems like we're always kind of lacking that. So luckily for me, I really didn't feel any like deficiencies or anything like that. And I was obviously went plant-based in like March, and then I got like my blood drawn and like tested in like August, and I seen like no deficiencies, like nothing. I think that, you know, maybe that's just me kind of getting lucky on that, because I know that going plant-based isn't always so easy for other people, and you really have to like be consistent with taking your supplements, especially as like a young athlete. It's just like definitely a big thing, and taking that is definitely not something that I'm super consistent and good at, and I think that's definitely something that's part of my plant-based journey that I definitely have to continue working on as
Great.
Yeah, that's
Thank
awesome.
you.
But as you mentioned, there are so many resources readily available right now that, you know, if someone wants to move in that direction, there's plenty of information available on what supplements they need to make sure that they're getting, identifying what in various plants is available to them through the food, and then what needs to be supplemented through, you know, as you said, you know, taking the actual supplements themselves. So I'm sure that you spend some time there doing your research. And I have to say, I'm so impressed with you teens, because you do use those resources. I know you do all kinds of research on this and everything else. You know, it's fascinating to me that at your fingertips, you have this information, but you make sure that you educate yourselves when you're making choices to know that you're making a good choice. And I really applaud you for all of that effort that you put into this to make sure that you're doing it well and doing it right. And it's truly inspirational for me as a much older person than you, and I'm sure for all of the young people who are watching this webinar with us tonight.
I did want to ask Rylee too as well. Have you followed the 5 Gyres initiative, like the effort and what they do, and going out and seeing the plastic patch, the garbage patch, when they go to actually observe it?
Yeah, that was, I think when I first started Grades of Green, that was like the first thing I learned about the Great Pacific Trash Patch. That's been my go-to thing whenever people ask, like, what's the big deal about, you know, plastic and things like that? And I'm like, there's an actual basically landfill in the middle of the multiple ones in the middle of the oceans, and they hold all these different plastics, microplastics, microbeads, all these different soupy, disgusting trash things that products that get into, you know, the fish, the food, everything all has like its cycle, it's in itself. And I've been following 5 Gyres, and I've been also recently I went to work at the Algalita, I think it's the Plastics Summit, and I definitely recommend, if any young teens, young adults want to go to that, definitely search up Algalita, because one of their founders, Captain Charles Moore, was the one who founded the Great Pacific Trash Patch, the first one, and it's so inspirational, and they give you so much information. And that's where I learned most of the stuff that I told you today. It was based off of what I learned from them and Grades of Green as well.
And that actually dovetails into our next webinar, which is going to focus on microplastics and how, thanks to the plastics that are everywhere in our environment, that Rylee spent so much time this evening sharing with us that information, that our next webinar, February 18th, we're going to talk about how when that plastic breaks down, it doesn't go away, as Rylee said, it just gets smaller and smaller and smaller. And microplastics are now everywhere in our environment. They're in our food, they're in our water, they're in the air. And so the focus of our February 18th webinar will be on microplastics, what they are, how they get there, what we can do to try to eliminate them, and to make sure that we are making healthy choices and doing what we can to eliminate this really, really hazardous waste from our environment. And then our last webinar of this series is going to be on March 25th. That will be sort of a wrap up of everything we've discussed over our series, and kind of a summary of eco-friendly choices that we can make in our everyday life. So we also have some resources to share with you. with these webinars, our goal is to learn something, to share knowledge and information, to provide ways to educate ourselves more outside of the webinar. So we have some things to read, we have some things to watch and listen to. In particular, I want to call your attention to the documentary Story of Plastic that Rylee mentioned. Surfrider LA is hosting a screening and panel discussion of this documentary on January 26th at 7 o'clock. And you can register for this on Eventbrite by going to lasurfrider.org. So again, you can screenshot these if you want to, but they will also be up on the South Bay Cares website. And then lastly, we want to leave you with some actions that you can take, not just in your personal life, but there's lots of advocacy that can be done, both locally, statewide, nationally, globally. So use your voice, as Rylee and Sam have done. Take action, and also make sure that we're not just asking others to act, that we're all acting personally in our own actions to be everyday environmentalists. So with that, we will move to our last giveaway. But before I do that, I want to ask all of you who have participated this evening to share the webinar link, because as I said, it will be up on our South Bay Cares website, with your friends, with your family, with others who are interested, who maybe couldn't attend tonight, but who want to learn more. And I am confident that anyone who sees this webinar will be tremendously inspired by Sam and Rylee, our two youth environmental leaders. It has been such a pleasure having you with us this evening. Thank you for, in the busy world of teenagers, for sharing your time and passion with us this evening. So one other thing before I do this final giveaway, one thing that Laura had suggested I mention is that that each of us, if we want to see what we are doing personally and how we can do more, is to calculate your own carbon footprint. And that is an exercise that some of us have done. We think we're committed environmentalists, and it gives us a little bit of pause. And so I think that's one of the resources that is on that page that we put up there. And so our final giveaway, this is a $50 gift certificate that was so generously donated to us by Love Bags. Love Bags is a local company that makes reusable bags. Yay. But they're not just any reusable bag. They use high quality, durable fabrics made from recycled plastic bottles. They are guaranteed to withstand a lifetime of use, and they're very cute. You can use them for your shopping, you can use them for your groceries, you can use them to go to the beach, you can use them as your gym bag, you can use them as just about anything. So I know that you'll be thrilled, whoever is the lucky winner of this $50 gift card, to see the amazing selection that they have on their website.
They make great gifts too. It's a really nice gift.
Right. Yes, that's nice, Dolly. We don't have to keep them for ourselves, right? Yes, they make amazing gifts. So, and lovely gift packaging too. So something else to think of. Okay, do we have a winner, Laura, for our $50 gift card to Love Bags?
We have a winner. Jaden Escobar is going to have fun shopping at Love Bags.
Oh,
Great, congratulations, everyone. Well, that concludes our webinar this evening. Again, I want to just give a huge shout out to the South Bay Cares people behind the scenes, and especially to our two teen speakers, Sam and Rylee, to Grades of Green, who was the impetus for their becoming the environmental leaders that they are, and everyone doing their part in our community really can make a huge difference, as is evidenced from what we've seen here tonight. So thank you for attending, and we hope to see all of you at our next webinar when we talk about microplastics.
yes. Everyone stay safe.
Thank you. Good night.